Should you be worried about lifter issues in your Chevy 1500? Well, that is the question we are going to try to answer today. What is going on today, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we have the famous 5.3 liter V8 in the Chevy 1500 trucks, a staple for over 20 years now. Pretty incredible. But recently, these 5.3s as well as these 6.2 and these 6 liters have all been having some major lifter failures. And I figured today would be a good time to maybe take a dive into what exactly is going on. The 5.3 engine debuted in 1999, replacing the legendary 350 small block, which was one of the greatest internal combustion engines made in the 20th century. So this thing had a lot to live up to. And to start off, these 5.3s were also very powerful, strong engines. The term LS swap comes to mind, where these things were being dropped into performance cars because, well, they were well built, they were strong, you can make tons of power out of them, and they were cheap. As the years have gone by, GM implemented 3 different generations of this engine. In 2007, GM dropped the 2nd gen, and then in 2014, GM dropped the 3rd gen, which is what this engine is right here, also known as the Ecotec 3. And we are coming on to its 10th year of production, which is kind of cool. But this is also the generation where we really started to see some major lifter problems, lifter failures with these 5.3 liter engines. The lifter issues in this engine are caused by one major thing, and that is GM's cylinder deactivation technology, also known as active fuel management, or in later years, what this engine has, dynamic fuel management. Now, technically, active fuel management or the cylinder deactivation technology came out in 2007 in the 2nd gen, but in my opinion, I feel like this 3rd gen engine has been just riddled with lifter problems, much more than the 2nd generation, which is why I want to focus on this engine. Now, unfortunately, the other V8 available in these trucks, the 6.2 liter, is also suffering from these lifter problems because, well, it also has dynamic fuel management in it. What exactly is this cylinder deactivation technology? So in 2007, GM released what's called active fuel management. And this basically shut down 4 cylinders when the engine did not need to put out that much power or that much torque. And those cylinders had special lifters that could collapse and therefore keeping the valves closed and essentially shutting down 4 of the 8 cylinders. So the engine would only run on 4 cylinders, reducing fuel as well as emissions. Now, these special lifters are hydraulically controlled with engine oil, and what was happening sometimes is that when these lifters would collapse on themselves, and then when the engine needed power again, they would re-engage to the camshaft, and the lockout pins would simply fail, and basically the lifter would not re-engage. It would eat the camshaft, it would destroy the lifter, obviously, eventually causing misfires and spreading metal throughout the engine, which eventually would cause complete engine failure. Once that metal would get into the main bearings, it was game over. So that is the main issue when it comes to lifter failures with active fuel management. Now, when a lifter would not re-engage or the lockout pin would fail, you'd get a pretty nasty tick on these engines, and that ticking is that lifter just getting slapped around by that camshaft lobe and, you know, basically eating both parts and eventually leading to engine failure. Now, if you catch it early enough, you can simply just replace the lifter and probably the camshaft itself, and you should be okay. Now, personally, I would want to replace all the lifters, but if the issue is caught soon enough, if you notice a tick in your engine and it gets resolved quickly, you can still save the engine. But once all that metal debris goes through your engine, you know, it's just a ticking time bomb at that point. Now, starting in 2019, GM ditched the active fuel management, and I think this made people a little bit happy because, well, GM was finally realizing that there was an issue, and they were going to implement a different cylinder deactivation technology, hopefully being more reliable. Instead, what GM came up with is called dynamic fuel management, and instead of only 4 cylinders potentially being shut down, dynamic fuel management allows all cylinders to be shut down. There's 16 different firing patterns. This engine can actually run on 2 cylinders, which is a little bit crazy. And well, it turns out that instead of making these engines more reliable with a different cylinder deactivation technology, they really just poured gasoline on the fire. So the 2019 plus 5.3 liter engines have been and are experiencing a greater amount of lifter failures because, well, I mean, instead of just having 4 cylinders with quote unquote special lifters, now all 8 have these collapsible lifters, and you know, do the math, it would probably add to doubling of the issue. And that's exactly what kind of happened, is that these engines were just having massive lifter failures in comparison to the active fuel management lifter failures. And so this is what prompted GM in 2021 to release a service bulletin in regards to this problem. So here's what GM has to say in their service bulletin released in 2022 actually. The condition or the complaint, if you will, check engine lights regarding misfires, engine misfires themselves, as well as a tick or a complaint of a tick in the engine. GM says the cause could be lifter that is mechanically collapsed or stuck all the time, internal locking pin damage in the lifter due to oil aeration, lifter that has collapsed in the bore or stuck in the lifter bore, as well as engine may have a bent push rod. So basically, GM admitting that there is a problem with the lifters. Now, along with the service bulletin, GM also released an updated lifter, hoping to solve the problem. Now, I don't necessarily have high hopes for this updated lifter. I think it's more of a band-aid for just a poor design. And listening to what actual GM service technicians have to say, it seems like this is not the first updated lifter in these engines, and all of the past updated lifters really haven't done much. So that's why I say I don't necessarily have high hopes that this is going to completely solve the problem. The other thing that I found interesting listening to GM service technicians talk about these issues in these engines is that it seemed like warranty wanted to only pay for the absolute bare minimum to get these engines running and back on the road and out of warranty. You know, you would think if you had a lifter failure on one of the banks, you would want to replace all those lifters and the camshaft. Apparently that's not the case. GM specifically said only replace what was damaged and leave all the rest. You know, if it's my personal engine, I would want all the lifters changed, and I guess that's just not what was happening. Apparently, metal that had gone through the engine was ignored, potentially bent push rods were ignored, valve springs that could be damaged were ignored, as well as just reusing parts that should have probably been replaced, and then pushing them out until warranty was over, resulting in kind of just these ticking time bomb engines and leaving the end cost onto the consumer, the customer, and the buyer of these trucks and engines. The last thing I want to do is put blame towards the GM mechanics, because that's not what I'm going with this. Myself as a mechanic, a heavy duty mechanic, when it comes to warranty, your hands are pretty much tied. Warranty only pays so many hours for certain jobs. You're only allowed so many parts, and then all other costs either fall on the dealership or the consumer, the customer. And so, you know, if warranty's telling these service technicians to only do certain things, that's what they're gonna do, because the dealership doesn't want to eat that cost, and the customer is not gonna want to pay when the truck is under warranty. So it's a tough situation for sure. Now, as you can imagine, with the price of these darn trucks these days, people were starting to get very upset with GM. And, you know, to be honest, most manufacturers make a ton of money from trucks. It's probably the most profitable vehicle that a manufacturer sells is a pickup truck. So keep that in mind next time you go and buy a truck, as they are making a ton of money off you, and these things aren't cheap. But anyways, yeah, people were getting very upset, and this resulted in a class action lawsuit once again being filed against GM in 2021. Now, this lawsuit claims that, quote, GM made and sold these vehicles without disclosing that their AFM and DFM lifters were defective in design. And if the defective engine valve lifter is unremedied for too long, the entire engine can be damaged, necessitating an expensive full engine replacement. And to be frank, they're not really wrong either. You know, like I mentioned earlier, once one of these lifters really chews into a camshaft and there's metal spread out through the engine, there's gonna be wear on a ton of parts, and it's probably realistically gonna shorten the life of the engine quite a bit. So we know it's pretty clear that the lifters in these engines are somewhat faulty. Now, if you own one of these engines, are you up shit's creek? Not necessarily, no. The lifter failure percentage on these engines is anywhere from like 2 to 3%, which again, statistically, you're way more likely not to have issues with your lifters. Now on the flip side of that, 2 to 3% you might think is not that much at all. Well, realistically, a well-built engine should have a failure rate of under 1%. So these engines are failing 2 to 3 to 4 times more than, let's say, a well-built engine, if you will. So there definitely is an issue, but it's not like every single engine is going to have a lifter failure. In fact, statistically speaking, like I said, you're way more likely to have a good running, long running engine. Now, if you guys are still worried about having lifter failures on your 5.3s or your 6.2s, thankfully there's a lot of aftermarket tuners that will basically disable the AFM or DFM cylinder deactivation, essentially not allowing the lifter to collapse ever. The lifter will always just stay engaged with the camshaft, which will dramatically lower the chance of a lifter failure. Unfortunately, I believe putting any tuner on your engine will most likely void your warranty. So there is some give and take there. Do you wait till the end of the warranty period, or do you just say, screw it, put the tuner on it, and potentially void some warranty? So, you know, it's not a perfect solution by any means. Another thing I would make sure to do if I owned one of these engines is use some high quality oil, use a good oil filter, and change your oil on a relatively good time basis. These lifters run on engine oil, and the last thing you want to do is put just bad engine oil in there and potentially increase the risk even more of a lifter failure. So yeah, run some good quality oil in these engines, and hopefully that will help you guys along. So unfortunately, I feel like these 5.3s just are not as reliable as they once were. There just doesn't seem to be a fix for these lifter issues as of right now, that we can concretely say that it is now no longer an issue in these engines. You know, I think there's just more reliable engine options in the 1500 segment. I think the 5-liter Ford is a great engine. It seems very reliable, makes good power, it's fuel efficient. It's not perfect. Again, no engine is perfect, but I think that's a more reliable option. I would say even the 5.7 HEMI is probably a more reliable engine option at this point in time than the 5.3 or the 6.2. Yes, the 5.7 HEMI has had lifter issues and probably still will have lifter issues, but it seems like those lifter issues are mostly caused from high idle times as well as poor oil maintenance. And I think most owners can easily avoid those situations. So I think the 5.7 HEMI is probably even a more reliable engine option as of right now. The silver lining, if you guys love your Chevy or GM trucks, is that they make a absolute fantastic diesel engine option. The 3-liter inline-6 Duramax is, in my opinion, as a diesel mechanic, a fantastically built modern diesel engine. I think you can't go wrong with that engine. You're gonna get great fuel economy, you got good towing, good power out of it. If you guys are unsure about these V8s right now, that 3-liter is a really cool engine option and worth you guys checking out. Well, I'm sure, as you guys can tell, I do have a little bit of a cold, and that's my opinion on the lifter issues in these trucks. I don't think it's the absolute end of the world if you own one of these 5.3s or 6.2s. Odds are you're going to be just fine, but without a doubt, it is definitely an issue, and I would like to see GM at least try and, you know, resolve it, fix it, figure it out, because I think these 5.3-liter engines are greatly loved, and the bare bones of them are fantastic. They're good engines. They always have been, and I just would really like GM to kind of figure it out, whether they have to ditch the cylinder deactivation. I hope you liked the video. If you did, don't forget to leave that thumbs up. And if you like cool stuff like this, don't forget to subscribe, because, well, we'd love to have you guys on board. Anyways, enough of me. I'm gonna go get some rest. See you in the next freaking video.